Good evening, folks. It is 5 p.m. here in Arizona, so we're going to go ahead and get started as in alignment with their advertising to you. It's been a crazy day. I am grateful to be slowing down and getting to spend an hour with some friends and talk a little bit about aversive childhood experiences and how those aversive childhood experiences turn into the negative outcomes that if any of you've read about it, about ACEs, how it turns into psychological and what is diagnosable as psychiatric conditions later on in life, and also lots and lots of physical ailments. How and why that happens, and how and why that treating ACEs can't be just cognitive. It has to deal with the body, have to interrupt the threat response before people can start to experience healing and a sense of well-being. So I want to jump in on that. This is Jenny was supposed to be here and let these people in, so I'm juggling lots of things here. So don't get upset with me if I get lost. So I want to start out with just hello and welcome, and want to do some ventral vagal connection with everybody and welcome you here, and to let every one of you know that you're precious, and that really appreciate you taking time out of your this evening to join us and be a part of this, and to let you know that Jenny and I are dedicated to helping people recover from trauma and helping empower those that help people recover from trauma. And if we can be of service in that, if that is your mission and we can be of service in that, then that is what we do, and would love to hear from you how we could be helpful. Embodying trauma-informed care. So most of you've heard something about trauma-informed care, and for a lot of years since Sandy Bloom first coined the term, it's not we don't ask what's wrong with you, we ask what's happened to you. And Sandy Bloom was the director. She's a psychiatrist in Philly that started the very first inpatient treatment program for trauma survivors called The Sanctuary. And since then, it's been more a collection of policies and good policies, but the importance of those policies is that they're implemented by people in relationship to service, in service, in relationships with each other. Any service that is delivered that requires trauma-informed care is being delivered to another human being. And how we are in those relationships produce the felt sense of well-being and safety in our clients, or the continuation of the perception of being exploited, of being hurt, of being in danger in institutions. So we want to be able to help the people that we serve to have a felt sense of safety as early as we can in our interventions with them, which is what I'm trying to do with you guys right now, is to welcome you. You see my face is all bright and engaged, and I'm looking at you in the eye of the camera. That's part of what co-regulation and helping people to heal from the effects of ACEs starts with, is relaxed body connection. And so to start this process, there's a lot of people showing up, and I'm kind of letting everybody in and trying to talk at the same time. So most of you have heard about aversive childhood experiences. We're presenting this evening as kind of a trial run and a dress rehearsal for doing it for the Arizona ACE Consortium next week. And so we did not have this slide in here today. And I thought, well, there's probably some, because all of those people will know ACEs inside and out. But thinking that there might be some of you that are not terribly familiar with aversive childhood experiences, and In 1997, Vincent Flitti and Robert Anda from the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente in San Diego, they did a study with 17,000 people that were part of the Kaiser Health Network. And they asked them questions about their experiences growing up, and then they asked them about their health pretty thorough review of their health. And what they found was that there were 10 primary aversive childhood experiences. Now, since then, we've learned that there's a whole lot more, but the 10 that have always been kind of central to the ACE's work is childhood physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, emotional and physical neglect, mental illness in the home, separation or death of parents, domestic violence, alcoholism, drug abuse in the home, or incarceration. Those are the 10 kind of factors. Did the child experience that at some time between birth and 18 years old? And what we've learned is that if you have 5 of those, you're 8 times more likely to be an alcoholic. If you have 6 of those, when compared to people that have 0 of those ACEs, there's a 20-year difference in lifespan, which is pretty freaking profound that there's that much difference. And so something's happening to the people who experience aversive childhood, who have these aversive childhood experiences, that is different than people that have secure attachment and loving caregivers that can act as a buffer and instill resilience in children. And to just kind of give a little bit of an example of what this might be like, when I was 10 years old, my parents divorced. And I didn't understand what that was. I just kind of heard it and I went and played. You know, I knew that they had been contentious for ever since I came to consciousness, but they were getting a divorce. And on the day that it was happening and that my father was leaving, my parents took me and my sister to a neighbor's house we lived on a cul-de-sac, and they were up at the top of the cul-de-sac and we were down here at the kind of entrance of the cul-de-sac, and it was, I don't know, 400 or 500 yards away. So I was in their house and playing with their kids, and I started getting what I would now call anxious. I just was irritated and hyperactive, and I couldn't sit still. So I said I was going to the bathroom, but really what I did is I snuck out of their house, and I went the back way around all the houses, and I came up in an empty lot across the street from the house that I lived in. And there were some bushes along, it was like a precipice a little bit. And I climbed up and I kind of laid at those bushes, and I watched my father get in the car. And he looked really stoic, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if I was supposed to, kind of run after him and hug him or ask him not to go. I just remember being paralyzed with fear, just being terrified about what was happening. I didn't understand what was happening, but I just had terror in my body. And he kind of very stoically got in the car, started it up, and started driving down out to the next road. And I had just a complete overwhelming terror response, and I took off running after the car, and of course I couldn't catch it. And by then the family with which I was staying, they realized I was gone, and they were all out trying to find me, and they heard me screaming, and they came down, and they both the husband and the wife kind of restrained me, and I was screaming and couldn't do anything. I was trying to break away from them, and they got angry with me for making a scene in the neighborhood. Now, what do you suppose was happening in the body of that 10-year-old child from that whole, those 45 minutes that transpired there? What was going on in the muscles in his body? What was the energy in that body like? It was lots and lots and lots and lots of energy. So much energy that it couldn't be contained, and it overwhelmed me. And what do you think happened for the rest of my life around situations where there was intimacy or connection. I was can you see that that as a result of that, in the same way that a combat veteran is afraid of loud noises, I became terrified of intimacy, and I became terrified of separation and abandonment and loss. That both of those terrors, I didn't want to kind of get in that situation where I could lose. And then once I was connected with friends or you know, people that I cared about, that then there was this kind of chronic terror of being left and being alone. And my score is 9. I have 9 of 10 of those things. And you know what I want to kind of press upon you is to think about every single time that a child has an aversive experience, that it's a wound. It is a physical wound. It's a brain injury. That it's a little bit more fear, because what happens during that time is that the experience gets encoded into memory with fear, with terror. And that is what produces later on, the more of those ACEs that a person has, the more painful experiences they have in their development. This is all kind of cumulative and incrementally changing the child from being a self-governing entity that's going out and exploring their world and developing competency in social situations and developing competency in motor skills and all of that. What happens is the more aversive childhood experiences that a child has, the more they become organized around self-defense. That everything gets organized around self-defense going forward. So what happens with that is that the more, and for children that have caregivers that are able to A, be in relaxed bodies, and B, able to attune, then that mitigates the effect of those. That children can experience trauma and not get traumatized, not end up with post-traumatic stress if they have caregivers that are able to be in relaxed bodies around them and to be able to attune to them. Sweetie, come over here. Yeah, it's okay. It's going to be all right. I know you're scared, and that's okay to be afraid. That can do that type of talk and connection with them. Then all of that energy mitigates, because safety for children is relaxed body caregivers. I always kind of say that alpha safe, pack safe. And for people that have lots of ACEs, who is committing those wounds are usually the people that are responsible for giving the care. So people that are children that are experiencing being hurt by their caregivers, in the way that a motor vehicle accident survivor has fear driving, the way a combat veteran has fear of loud noises, people that have ACE scores have fear of being around other people, that they encode the memory that in the future context, that situations that are sensory similar activate that charged sensory memory, and it produces a threat response here in the present where there is little or no danger. So when you see children that have higher ACE scores and they're at school and they can't focus on their schoolwork, they're sitting at their desk and you know that they're interrupted constantly and they're fidgety and they're doing that. When a psychologist looks at that, a school psychologist, they see ADHD. When a trauma therapist looks at that, they see a child that has a lot of arousal in their body and that is now moving into self-defense of scanning the room to see what everybody else is doing, which that's not pathology, that is competency for them having survived all those aversive childhood experiences in the past. So Children that have had a lot of that, their bodies are constantly over-energized. They've got too much energy in their body for them to function. And that chronic hyperarousal, that state of jacked upness, as that child gets launched into adolescence, that becomes physiological and psychological negative effects that you hear about. It becomes depression, it becomes anxiety disorders, it becomes bipolar, it becomes all of those things that look like that. But we, as the field of mental health, have not been evaluating whether or not the person has had trauma in their past. I was married to a psychiatrist for several years, and she saw people that came in with depressive symptoms, and she diagnosed them with depression. She saw people that came in with anxiety symptoms, and she diagnosed them with anxiety. There was never a question about, well, did you have any trauma in your childhood? That was never asked. So as we have done the ACEs research, that's one of the things that started to happen more and more frequently, is we start seeing that, oh my gosh, everybody that comes in for mental health services has ACE scores. I've never had a client that has an ACE score 0, never. And I've seen thousands of clients. So survivors of ACEs are often living in near constant perception of threat. Their bodies now, as what it took for them to survive all of those experiences, and being in that constantly jacked up autonomic nervous system, causes them to now perceive threat here in the present as they are engaging relationally with other people. They're afraid of other people's judgment. They're afraid of being hurt by other people. And so there's this constant hypervigilance that becomes a way of life for that person. And their bodies are overcharged and the cells are breaking down, that it is causing harm, that it is not sustainable living while a person is in that state of chronic hyperarousal. And as we're going to show you here in a second, that the resolution of ACEs is in the body. And as the beautifully simplistic piece of this is you cannot have any kind of stress. You can't have traumatic stress. You can't have post-ACEs stress. You can't have any kind of work-related stress. You can't have any kind of stress in a body whose muscles are relaxed. It's physiologically impossible to have both. Well, for 100 years, we've been working on this stuff as though it were a psychological phenomena. And what we're finally now learning is that, no, it's physiological. And as we get the physiology right, as we help people to get in relaxed bodies, what starts happening is their thinking arights. They're not having intrusion. They're able to use their executive functioning. They're able to function well. And it's like, oh, goodness. So we work with the body and everything else starts to get better very quickly. Yes, that is correct. So that's what embodying means, in understanding that the wound is to the body, that it is a chronic state of dis-ease, of discomfort, of threat response that the person's in, and that is primarily physiological and not psychological. And kind of, this is just written out what I just said. As we help people, whether that's in a formal mental health psychotherapy context or whether that's just peer-to-peer with our friends, the more that we help them be able to get into bodies that are relaxed, they immediately reestablish well-being. And the more they do that, the less they are affected by those experiences of the past, the more they are desensitizing here in the present those negative effects. So what's that look like? That looks like releasing involuntarily constricted muscles, which I hope Jenny's here. I haven't seen her pop in here anywhere. Jenny, are you here? No, Jenny's not here. Okay. She told me she'd be here at 5. That I or Jenny, one of us will spend the second half of this, in about 10 minutes, we're going to walk you through how to do that. So that by being able to catch our bodies having an involuntary threat response because we're encountering something in the environment that is sensory similar to some painful experience of the past. Not always ACEs. It can be something from, it can be bullying. It can be just irritability from a caregiver. It can be sibling abuse. It can be any of those factors. As we help people who are perceiving threat to be able to release the involuntary constriction of the muscles in their body, they return to comfort, to well-being, and optimal functioning in a matter of seconds. That is, if there's not a more powerful message of hope for the 21st century and healing our species, I don't know what is. And that's what that I developed forward facing as a way of treating all of this without us having to go back and live through all of those horrible memories. And it's so hard to try to take somebody back to review and narrate all the ACEs. How many times for a person that has, an ACEs of 1 that is emotional abuse, how many times did that emotional abuse happen? And which one of those emotional abuse experiences are intruding into the present right now, causing the person to perceive threat here in the present? So it's exciting to help people to heal here now. And that requires helping them to get in their bodies and being able to manage their bodies. I see some hands up. We will have a Q&A here in a little bit. As soon as I walk through this, we'll save at least 10 minutes for Q&A. Encoding experiences as traumatic, it produces the perception of threat in future situations that are sensorially similar. So that's what I was talking about earlier, that I encoded my father leaving in the car with my amygdala, which is the hub and the wheel of fear. It is the fear generator in your brain. It was charging that sensory memory that every single time for the rest of my life that somebody that's close to me is leaving, I have a threat response now. It's diminished significantly after 50 years later and a lot of work on it, but it still happens. So when you start understanding that what looks like crazy is really self-defense, when you understand that, it lets you sit across from people who are doing things that can be pretty irritating and maintain a sense of compassion and hope for them. So it turns out that most of us here this evening and most of us that are caregivers and helpers are human beings. Oh, I don't know how to do this. I guess Jenny's here and I just gave her permission to do things. I hope that it works. So as I said earlier, those aversive childhood experiences were done to us or our clients by people, which turns into the perception of threat around people, especially, to make it even more sensory similar, people that they perceive to be in power, which is what clients experience when they walk into a mental health organization or into a doctor's office or into a school, is that we perceive those people in power as threatening, as that they're going to hurt us. And so we are in an immediate state of self-defense and jacked up autonomic nervous systems when we are engaging in institutions. A lot, I won't say that for everybody, but for most survivors of ACEs, that is kind of what the experience is. So What's the antidote to that? Well, the antidote to that is building relationships, because as we are able to connect in relationships, what happens is that threat response is muted. We're wired to interrupt the threat response, not just by relaxing the muscles of our body, but also by being in relationships with others. And as we are connecting with each other and attempting to negotiate relationships and stay in that relationship and connect with somebody, the result of that is the muting of the threat response in the brainstem. So there is a diminished amount of arousal. And when a person is around somebody in a relaxed body, there is the felt sense of safety that begins to emerge. It doesn't happen immediately, but over time, being with somebody who is in a relaxed body produces a felt sense of safety in their body. And for a lot of my clients, that I am the first person they have ever felt safe being around. And what's important about that is that you cannot create and sustain safety with room decorations or with the right words or the right intervention. That is a relational process. It happened in relationship, it heals in relationship. And so you being able to regulate your autonomic nervous system is really the epicenter. It's ground zero for trauma therapy. And it's what I teach a certification course in helping clinicians to treat traumatic stress. And I tell them that the most important intervention that you do working with somebody who is a trauma survivor is your ability to regulate your own autonomic nervous system, because that produces the felt sense of safety. And from that relationship with the felt sense of safety comes the ability for people to change, because they have that safe base. The very first time in my life that I ever experienced safety in relationship was with my therapist at 31 years old. And it changed me. I transformed as a result of that relationship. It changed everything in my life. It was really powerful. You're never too old to experience the miracle of secure attachment. And what does secure attachment require? What I said before, a relaxed body and attunement. And that attunement can be from a parent, it can be from a therapist, it can be from a teacher, it can be from any other human being. So the antidote to ACEs is self-regulation. For us starting and then helping our clients to be able to develop that capacity for themselves, so that we are teaching them how to fish rather than giving them fish to eat, that we are empowering them with the capacity to regulate their own autonomic nervous systems. And the more they do that, the less they are a victim of their past. So the other reason why it is so freaking important for us to be in regulated autonomic nervous systems. When I was 6 years old, I remember laying out in my backyard and watching flocks of birds fly over. And I watched those flocks, and if you've ever watched a flock of birds, they're really graceful, aren't they? They do these acrobatic things in the air. And I remember being 6 years old asking, how did they know? How did they know it was time to turn? And that was something that was always a question for me, clear up into adulthood, until I started stumbling on some of Dan Siegel's work. And I started discovering mirror neurons around my work with compassion fatigue. And what mirror neurons do is they do a whole lot of different things. They're responsible for vicarious learning. They read people's intention by previous experiences, that if you see a particular look on a face and that going to get hit by a caregiver that has that look on their face, then you encode that look as an intention in other people. But the biggest thing that mirror neurons do is that for all animals, they are species-specific empathy attenuation. So, a herd of cows, if one cow out on the periphery gets scared, the cow on the other side of that herd in seconds or less is afraid too. That it moves through very infectiously, very quickly through the whole herd, and the whole herd is now having a threat response. Well, it turns out that human beings do the same thing. is that if you are around somebody who is in a threat response, check it out. So are you. And it's involuntary and it's subcortical. And most of us don't even know that it's happening. The only way you can know that it's happening is you got to check in on your body. And if you're around people who are anxious, check in on your body. You'll start seeing that you got muscles that are tight. And you didn't know they were tight until you checked in your body. Abdominal muscles, pelvic muscles, trapezius muscles, those are the most common ones. And unless you intentionally release those muscles, then you're a victim of the anxious people around you. That's what makes environments toxic, is a bunch of anxious people and nobody self-regulating in the middle of all of those anxious people. So that to understand that that our clients can read that activation in us, no matter how calm we appear on the outside, they feel us. And that's mostly happening unconsciously. The person is not saying, oh, you're in a threat response to us. You know, they don't know. What starts happening though, is their leg will start bouncing if we're in a body that is activated. So you can't fake it. You can't appear calm on the outside because your voice tones and your micro movements, all of that is betraying it. And your clients have been around people their whole life that are anxious, and they read that. And that's all happening at a preconscious nervous system level that's not even getting to the frontal lobe. They don't know that it's happening, but it's happening. And I hope that you can extrapolate what this means for marriages and families in your own life. That the most important thing you can do to bring well-being to your family is get and keep yourself in a relaxed body. So last thing I've got is, every time you hear somebody say stress, I hope that you leave this little thing, this little experience, this little face-to-face activity of stress equals threat response. It is your body's organic response to the perception of threat. That's what stress is, all stress. And its antidote is self-regulation. And what is self-regulation? The ability to interrupt that physiological threat response without using something external, and without having to interrupt the activities of daily living. It's not going to meditate for 15 minutes, although that may help, but it's the ability in real time to recognize that I'm having a threat response in this moment and interrupt it. That is the antidote to my painful past. And what happens when we interrupt the threat response? You immediately move into health. Your body moves into parasympathetic nervous system dominance, which is the repair system. So you are getting healthier instead of sicker immediately. You begin to facilitate post-traumatic growth. You adaptively resolve, and you are now forward-facing instead of backward-facing. So, good gosh, it is such a cornerstone of transforming and maturing that I've stopped looking at self-regulation as something that is mental health oriented and looked at it as essential to adult development. So Jenny's going to talk a little bit about how to do that. Jenny, are you here? Oh, would you raise your hand, Jenny, if you are here? I see a hand down there somewhere, but I don't see Jenny. Oh, there you are. Yay. Let me make you the host. And now you should be able to control everything. Can you unmute?
There.
Yay!
I can unmute. Oh, what's the video? I like being in control of things. So welcome everyone, glad you're here. And the little thing I wanted to add that I was thinking about as Eric was going over that beginning part is the relational part of ACEs also really explains why a person who has an ACE score of 1 or an ACE score of 3 can have really, really high trauma symptoms, because the ACEs are a relational experience. And so if their adverse childhood experience was primarily involving their attachment figure, well, that trauma is going to be significant. And being able to share that with my clients has brought a lot of normalcy and lessened shame for those with low ACE scores and high symptom profile. So just wanted to throw that in there as an added bit. So we're going to talk about the pathway to self-regulation. A lot of you are familiar with forward facing. So you've watched our videos, Tools for Help, where we teach you to self-regulate. We're going to cover a little bit of that tonight, but we're going to look at this whole picture in the way of how does this actually connect me with my client in real time? How does this, as a direct service provider, help me to provide safety? Because usually and often we talk about self-regulation as the way to prevent burnout, as the way to heal compassion fatigue. And it's really, though, so much more than that. Like Eric was saying, it's the pathway. It's not just mental health, it's all health. So there's two ways that we can self-regulate, two my primary pathways. There's the top down and bottom up. I like to use a lot of metaphors that make sense to kids. And so neuroception is when we're doing our top down regulation. So neuroception is when we're using our upstairs brain or our frontal lobes to communicate with our bodies or to communicate with our limbic systems that we're safe. And so I don't know about Eric over there, but when we were having the mix up of who's, where's Jenny, then that was a time where I could use my neuroception to remind my body, there's no reason to panic. He'll know I'm here eventually. And that's something that's available to me. And my body was able to see that, to notice that. Interoception is when we can feel our bodies in real time and then use that information to send it back up through our brainstem and into our frontal lobe that we're safe. And so we're going to get into details about more ways to do that. I like going back and forth between neuroception and interoception. So again, neuroception is top down, interoception bottom up. You got to do both. And if anything, neuroception is more commonly talked about. You might not hear the word neuroception, but it's what people are talking about. The interoception is the one that neuroception doesn't work without it, and it's so crucial. So we're going to get into that a little bit. I think you have the remote, Eric. Can you get the next slide? Okay, so here we are, neuroception, top down. We can ask ourselves, am I safe? Looking around, where's the danger? Is there danger? And then, wait, do I feel safe? And if there's no danger that is empirical, that I can prove in this moment, then I can know that I'm safe. The feeling safe is a feeling, but not a state. And so we cannot feel state as a way to know, to give our brain the information. That's more of an experience. I feel afraid. I can feel scared. I can feel shame. I can feel uncertain. And then being able to pull apart the difference between I am safe and I feel afraid. I am safe and I'm scared. I feel safe and I'm uncertain. Even as I've worked with my children, been able to help them, often we think like, I don't feel safe, I don't feel safe. And safety, though, is an experience that we can have in our body, even in the very same space as the other negative emotions. Not negative, but the emotions that we usually associate with unpleasantness. And so next slide, that interoception is where we're using the bottom up. Can I get that next slide, Eric? Thank you. Is what happens in our bodies when we perceive threat? Well, there's this whole cascade of physiological changes, but it's primarily pronounced in muscle constriction, that all perceived threat ends up in muscle constriction. So by the time you notice perceived threat, you already have constricted muscles. There's no way to have a threat response if those muscles are not constricted, because what does that do? It prepares us to fight or flee. So how do we release these threat responses, interrupt these threat responses? Well, it's important to know that these muscles constricted involuntarily. Stephen Porges teaches us that when we are scared as mammals, then we go to involuntary mobilization, and involuntary constriction. And so just as how they were constricted involuntarily, we now get to release them voluntarily. But we can't release them if we don't know where they are. And so here's the embodiment part. Here is where the importance of interoception, that I can't be safe in this body that I have unless I know what it feels like. And so it's not we have lots of recordings on YouTube and even more about how to regulate the body, how to find all those different spaces. And it's something that if you're familiar with forward facing and you're still looking for more ways to help your clients just discover their bodies, that's definitely a way you can reach out to us, because it's a way for sure that I've been coming up with a lot of creative ideas. So like any other skill, it's something that requires practice to perfect. And go ahead, next slide. And so a lot of you have done this before, but for those of you who are completely new, I'm going to show just one thing that in forward-facing language we call the wet noodle. And the wet noodle is, we like to start with the simplest tools and then move up to the most complex. So tonight we're just going to talk about the most simple tool, which is the body scan, or the wet noodle, which is any time that I check in with myself, like right now, I will always find my muscles constricted. Sometimes more than others, but they will always be tight, because I'm, as a human, unless I'm actively relaxing, I'm going to return to my baseline of tension. And so in my wet noodle, I will start at the top of my head, and I'll invite you to open your eyes, close your eyes, whatever feels most comfortable for you at the moment. And just notice softening for a count of about 5 seconds down your body. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then soften again as we go up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now if we were teaching a group class, we'd be asking you to notice what's your stress level compared to a moment ago. For some people, they find that space of well-being immediately. Other people, especially if they're more complex trauma survivors, it takes longer. So another way, it's called Jacobsen relaxation or progressive muscle relaxation. But another way just to find that body is immediate tensing of everything, and then releasing. And for a lot of people who are used to being out of a body, trauma survivors have lived their lives out of their bodies. That first tension and then releasing allows a space of discovering very safely. Oh, this is what it's like to be in a body. Oh, now this body isn't so tense. And maybe this is worth experimenting with. And so these little bits when I send up a follow-up email, I'll include our 3 different videos that teach all the skills. The one is the shorter version that I've done. The other is the more comprehensive version that Dr. Gentry has done. Both are really helpful. So go ahead to the next slide. So here we are, co-regulation. This is what I get really excited to talk about, because I know a lot of that you here are parents. If you're not parents, you have family members. or you're around children. And so this is for your clients, for the people you serve, and also for the children you're around. Because I have people ask me all the time, how do I teach my kids to self-regulate? How do I teach my kids to self-regulate? And I say, you can't. But then I say, but you can help them regulate. You can co-regulate with each other. So co-regulation is the foundation of trauma-informed care. It requires us to be self-regulated. But what I love about it, and the more I learn about generational trauma, historical trauma, and different communities that have been marginalized and have heard from these people, the big problem is that if we as in being the system, if whoever we're involved with, if it's an agency or organization, even a nonprofit, anytime we come in with a program as an outside expert, who cares if it's SAMHSA-based and if it's evidence-based, that you have a committee, you have a community that has been wounded repeatedly by experts and authorities coming in to help. And so no matter what you're offering to the clients or communities, you first have to establish the rapport. And here's a secret. It's the rapport doesn't then get you to being, oh, now I can offer you this evidence-based treatment protocol. The true rapport, which is co-regulation, is the treatment protocol, because through it, it is the treatment. Because now you are communicating with your body that you are a safe person, that I'm a safe person. And their bodies can read that much faster than their brains can. So when we can come first with presence, not programs, to the people that we serve, they will begin to heal no matter what program that you're offering them. And like Eric likes to say, this is treatment, it's science, and it's magic. It's magic when you're sitting across from someone and you see the sparkle in their eye because they believe you, and they start to feel a little bit safe for maybe the first time, safe in the context of another. So a story that I was thinking of, a while ago, I was watching a documentary of the miracle on the Hudson when the plane landed and they had to rescue all those people. And so in the documentary, there was this lady who had slipped off the wing of the plane and was in the frigid water. She'd been there for a while, and all these ferries were coming to rescue the people on the wing, but they weren't going to get to her fast enough. So they sent in a helicopter full of these dive rescue guys that jumped off and were trying to save her. Well, she was very activated, of course, in her full-on threat response for good reason. And here she's presented with this evidence, not evidence-based, but evidence that she is going to be rescued, that she's going to be okay and safe. But guess what? Because she could see the helicopter right there above her. Here's these 4 guys with ropes and harnesses here to rescue her. And yet her body was just flailing out of control. And as they interviewed the rescuers, they talked about how they had seconds, but they had to calm her through their presence, through their voice and their affect. Otherwise, either she was going to drown or they were going to have to use some hard force to subdue her in order to rescue her. And so what I'd like to present to those of you listening is that I suspect that not very many of us are rescue divers that go and rescue people from plane crashes. But the people we work with, their limbic systems are just as elevated, if not even more, than that lady who survived a plane crash, because they've been living in these chronically hyper-aroused states for years and years and years. And they desperately need the calm presence that can say, hey, I'm with you for the long haul. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, we want to make sure we have time for questions, but yes, co-regulation is the all-inclusive package. You know, Dr. Gentry started his career on compassion, fatigue, burnout prevention, resilience. The cool thing, here's the secret, co-regulation gives you that and then it gives healing to the client's ACEs. It prevents ACEs and others, and it helps facilitate our own post-traumatic growth as we are escorting others through this process. Next. And so how can you get involved? We're going to take questions in a second, but most of you have heard of this book that we released last month, in October actually, Forward Facing Freedom. This is one of the first treatment protocols that was intentionally designed to resolve the effects of ACEs. And when I say treatment protocols, well, it's a self-help community-based protocol. And so it's isn't limited to being used across the office with a therapist. So it's designed to resolve the effects of ACEs. And I would say it's doing that. I'm seeing it every day in my own family and in those I'm serving. So your opportunities for engagement that we'll send out more information about, you can become a certified forward-facing coach. And the shortest way I love to describe that is, before I even met Dr. Gentry, he said that 80% of what he does can be done by anyone. And so what we've done with our forward-facing coaching certification is identify what exactly is that 80% that you don't need to be licensed to do to help bring others to healing. And we've distilled that into a coaching protocol. We also have this forward-facing me group that is a 6-week group. The next one is coming up January 12th. We have 4 spots left. And that's your chance. If you want to know, okay, how can I experience this for myself, but also in community? Because I learned pretty quickly I couldn't implement this successfully on my own. So reach out to us if you have more questions. And now we will open it up for actually questions and answers. And let's see. No, Vernell's asking, can forward-facing coaches bill insurances? No. There's lots of different types of coaching, and as far as I'm aware of, none are billable for insurance. There are things that are up and coming. Different states have a certified, some states have a certified mental health coach that is billable through Medicare, but it's not under the context of we do. And I'm not saying the wrong word. It's not support. It's not coach. It's some support partner or something like that. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand and I will unmute you, or you can ask in the catch. Oh, is it Tia or Taya? It is way different than Udemy classes. So if I'll try to answer it briefly, and then I can reach out to you and give you more more answers. The coaching is Udemy is just taking a video and taking quizzes. So everybody who goes through our coaching course has very direct interaction with Dr. Gentry and myself. So we have an educational component where just some of the Udemy classes. We have the community learning component, which is the forward-facing me. And then you do 3 sessions of your own coaching sessions with Dr. Gentry or myself. And then you do those sessions with a partner. And after each session, either I or Dr. Gentry meet with you and we go over the whole session. So it's really in-depth and personal. Thank you, Tia. I happen to think it's amazing. And Shri or Sherry, peer support. Can you expand that? And feel free to raise your hand. I'm trying to. Oh, yes, it is the peer support. Thank you. That's what. And so will forward-facing coaching ever follow under the model of peer support? Maybe, but it's not anything that I see in the next year or two. We have enough challenge keeping our ducks in a row with where we are right now. Yes, I know Steve had some good questions. Steve, you want to raise your hand so I can unmute you? Or I can try to find you. Yeah, Shelly, who just asked a question, she's going to be starting her practicum in January. She's in our coaching program. Where is? Also, if you have any questions specific for Eric, he's still here. I wonder if Steve left. Aha, raising hand. Okay. 2 hands. I'm gonna. Okay, Vernell, I unmuted you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, everyone. So I want to know, I think I heard you say this, but I want to clarify it. So with this forward-facing coaching, once you become certified, so you're able to work with the individuals that are faced with trauma, and you don't have to be licensed?
Yeah, I mean, you can work with anyone. Anyone is eligible or is a good candidate, in our opinion. Let me add a disclaimer to that. You can work, anyone is a good candidate for forward-facing coaching, as in there's people who it can help with optimization, that maybe their life, they're not in crisis. They're not going through hellish trauma symptoms, but they want to be more intentional. And they're not happy with their relationships and this, that, or that. They can benefit from forward-facing coaching. We have a screening process that we teach in our coaching course to identify if for people who might not need a higher level of care than a coach is able to provide. Most people, though, if they're living the day-to-day life and they're struggling, they're going to be eligible. So we like to, because we don't treat trauma, coaches don't treat trauma, we optimize and catalyze health. So yes, we can see people who've experienced trauma, but we're more like to describe that our focus is catalyzing post-traumatic growth. And yes, that's right, Leslie. We are not doing trauma therapy. Coaching is not therapy. Then in the course, we go through the overlap of the difference, which is both and which is neither or, etc. Thanks, Sonia. Was there any other hands up? I thought I saw. I'll give it about 1 more minute and then we'll say goodnight if no one else has any other questions.
I just want to thank everybody for showing up and being a part of this, and blessings to each of you. It was very, very nice to get to hang out with you guys this hour.